build the awareness. Go and actually do your sums, do some costing on it, because you'd be incredibly surprised at the amount of like money and time you're actually spending on trying to get this stuff right. And I've had a lot of conversation with building surveyors and engineers, and they're saying this is the biggest risk for them at the moment.
Welcome to Fireproof, the Passive Fire podcast, where we delve into the world of passive fire protection. Join the ProFinish team as we dig into the issues we see on site and in our industry every day, and find out how you can save time, money, and headaches on major construction projects. Hi, I'm Russell Whiteford, one of the owners of ProFinish Fire Protection. I'm here with Jye one of the directors and owners. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome.
We work with tier 1 and 2 builders primarily, but all across the fire protection industry, and have done so over the past 5 years. We've started this podcast. Jye, do you want to maybe tell people why they're going to find value in this?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, we work with all tier 1, tier 2, 3 and 4 all through the construction industry. And so some of the things we're going to be talking about today will be basically what's going on in the industry. And so we're just going to go through like what we're seeing kind of now and in the future. And then, just any sort of tips and tricks along the way. So we're hoping to provide some value. It's kind of a longer form content than what we normally sort of produce. And so hopefully they'll get some benefit from it.
That's it. I don't know, maybe for people that might not be aware, is it worth giving people a rundown of what passive fire protection is?
Yeah, cool. So passive fire is... so it's all the stuff you don't see. So active fire is like sprinklers and water and everything like that, which most people are pretty common with. And passive fire is more like your fire walls, your all the stuff you don't see basically. So all the stuff in the ceilings, all the stuff that makes sure that if there is a fire, the fire's not going to be able to spread from one room to the next. And so passive is basically the opposite of active, and so it means that there's nothing that's going to necessarily occur at the time of event. It's just going to kind of prevent this spread of fire and smoke and gas, essentially. And so that's the difference between passive and active.
Yeah, and I think, like you were saying, it's something that people aren't aware of because they don't necessarily see it.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's so important because, if there is a fire in a building, a large residential or, high-rise commercial building, we don't often think about, how would I get out from the 20th floor?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the biggest things, allowing that time for people to get out when there is worst case scenario kind of thing. So
yeah, that's right. So there's been some changes like in the industry recently, and there's I suppose maybe a little bit of confusion. Can you give us a bit of a rundown of what's happened recently or what's been coming into effect over the last few years in the industry?
Yeah, for sure. So, I suppose to start with, like our industry in passive fire is like, it's never really been governed properly. And so in most trades are normally they actually have a trade. And so to start with, passive fire protection isn't a trade in Victoria. It is in Queensland, but it still isn't policed very well. And so basically, they're trying to increase the amount of government and the amount of governing that happens within the industry. And so some of the things they've brought in recently have sort of been in effect to help that. Most notably, the one May 1st was when basically all the changes came into effect. And so it actually was originally meant to be in 2019, the NCC, and that kept getting pushed back. And so one of the biggest things within our industry is that there's the suppliers actually own the testing on the products. And so when someone decides they want to go into passive fire protection and make a product, they have to go out there and do their own testing on their own products. And it means that they kind of hold majority of the power because there's basically a disconnect between the suppliers and then the governing bodies or the building surveyors and fire engineers and stuff. And so, as I said, it is definitely getting better and there's a lot more governing on it. And a lot of that is on the back of a lot of the fires. Like we only just recently saw the fire in Sydney.
Yeah, that was
happened.
massive.
Yeah, it's huge. And so there's, to be honest, every time there is a fire, everyone kind of like blows up and sort of starts to dive into the industry a little bit more. Like, why did it happen? What are we doing about it?
Could have been prevented.
Exactly, could have been prevented. People start caring. Like, they start actually thinking, well, that could happen to my building. Right. Are we safeguarded from it? So, yeah, like I said, lots of changes coming into play and into effect, and it's all kind of going towards that one thing of hopefully we do become a trade in the near future, and hopefully there is a lot more governance around it. But unfortunately, we're just sort of still playing in this little grey area.
Yeah, so it's kind of been bubbling away over the last few years, and we've had a couple of false starts, haven't we? With the changes coming into effect.
Yeah, that's right.
So now that it has come into effect, what does that mean for like current projects that were already in build, I suppose, in the build phase? And also, what does it mean for projects that are in the design phase at the moment?
Yeah, cool. So it's a really good point to raise. So it is a grey area, unfortunately, and so they've kind of the grey area comes with how do you enforce it, and so because people will say what NCC are we building to, and so for the majority, like I said, the NCC changed in 2019, and that was when most of the changes came into effect, but they've only just now been recognised on the 1st of May, and so what actually happened was. If there's a lot of buildings currently being built that are on the NCC 2019, but because they pushed the date so far back on when these passive fire changes were coming into effect, you had to use the old standards. And the reason you had to use the old standards is because a lot of the reason they kept pushing it back was the suppliers actually didn't have enough time to get the testing done on, based on the new standards and stuff. And so one of the biggest things that was gone was what they call the grandfather clause. And so that essentially means that everything had to be tested post 2014.
Yep.
And so if anything was done before that, in the past you were able to basically lean on those old test reports. But these days, well, now you aren't able to do that. And so we're in this grey area where we're meant to be building as per 2019 NCC, but there's no testing for the new standards. And so they couldn't be enforced until the 1st of May.
Yep.
We've just come into effect the 1st of May, and a lot of the suppliers have only just received a lot of their testing now or very recently.
Yep.
And so, you think of someone like us or anyone in the industry, pricing to the new standards was impossible. And so we're in this grey area where you basically have to install what was previously allowed until new buildings start, I suppose. And so I've had a lot of conversation with suppliers, and basically the stance that we're sort of taking is that any new projects that we've started on, that we've quoted and we've started on post 1st of May will follow the new standard.
Yep.
And that's kind of what they're willing to back us for and stuff like that. And so, but that's been the biggest change pretty much was that grandfather clause coming in.
And it's like you said, it's impossible to price work when you don't know what the standard's going to be.
Exactly,
and what you're going to have to apply to treat to achieve the fire rating that you need to. So that's not just for us. That's also for like builders and stuff, because like a lot of the people that we work with, they'll put in just like a provisional sum, or they'll put in like a square meter rate or whatever. And so, it's not just us that are getting this is coming to. It's actually the people that are contracting us and stuff. And so it goes the whole way up. That's what I was going to say. So back at tender time, when the builder put their price forward for the project,
exactly.
They didn't consider these things. So. And we know there's not an unlimited bucket of money for each project.
Yeah, I wish.
So leads me into the next point. What can builders do to, I suppose, mitigate any risk around this?
Yeah, so one of the services that we provide there's 3 pillars to passive fire protection: design, build, and document. And so one of the things that we really try to focus on and help with is design. And we've sort of built the company to be able to support that. We know that, especially coming into this like timing in this day and age where a really big problem in the industry is building surveyors and fire engineers as well. They're becoming few and far between. Like there's less and less of them because it's an ever increasing risk for people to be in those jobs, I suppose. And so what's happening is there's fewer and fewer building surveyors available, and the ones that are available, they take longer and longer to be able to get in touch with. And so a lot of these things you need a quick answer on.
Yep.
And so one of the things we've tried to do is really, we call it design, but essentially it's being a resource for builders to be able to lean on. And so we play in the space where we connect suppliers with the builders, or connect builders with suppliers. And so we're kind of that almost that conduit to be able to, like, builders can come to us and we can lean on all of the different suppliers because we have a relationship with them. We understand what they need to install and what they need to produce. And so the biggest piece of advice would just be to get in touch as early as possible and reach out for all the little things, and just even even like a lot of people, I talk to a lot of people and they reckon, yeah, we're across it. And then we go into an audit or like and they're not across it. And it's like, something that is for us can be as simple as showing us some photos, sending us your drawings, sending us plans, and we can go through and have a look at it. It's something that's really easy for us to do, but makes a massive difference for builders.
Look, I think it's probably similar to a lot of subcontractors where people that want your service might get in touch with you at the time that they think they need your service.
Yeah.
Or they might, get in touch with you after they've found out they need your service.
Yeah, that's right.
But to have somebody review your project, particularly from a passive fire perspective, early in the design phase could, save headaches later on.
Absolutely. It happens every day. Like we see the results every single day. Like when it's not considered, there's always negative effects. So it's a very easy thing to fix, I think. It just needs to be, you're absolutely right, considered at the right time.
Yeah. So I think talk about surveyors increasing their attention on this area. We sort of touched on it already, and maybe where we see the industry heading.
Yeah, cool. So some of the biggest reasons why, I suppose, I'll jump into that first and then we'll come back to the other question. We've spoken about how there's been a few fires recently. Notably, a few years ago, there was the Grenfell fire overseas. But then even something a little bit more closer to home, there's been a couple of fires like in Docklands more specifically. And it was found that what happened was after the fire occurred, the building surveyor and the fire engineer were actually the two that copped it the most. Building surveyor the most. They got so what happened was the building burnt down. Whoever it was, the board or whatever, sued the building surveyors. I think they actually sued the builder originally. And everything basically ended up falling back on the building surveyor and the fire engineer. I think it was like $4 or $5 million the building surveyor was sued, and I think it was like 2 or 3 that the fire engineer was sued. And so that put them out of business.
I'm sure their insurance premiums went up a fair bit.
Yeah, well, I actually think it put a few of the building surveyors, that particular building surveyor out of business. I'm not 100% sure on that, but you're absolutely right. What ended up happening on the back of it was the insurance companies hiked their prices.
Yeah.
And so it's become this massive. Unfortunately, it's taken something really negative to happen for something to happen or for someone to do something about it. And so that's why there are less and less of them. Because it's just becoming a point where it's so expensive. And, obviously builders got to wear that cost a lot of the time as well.
Yeah.
And then what was the other part of the question?
Where do we see that heading in the industry from here?
Yeah, cool. So short term, I think it'll be more of the same. Short to medium term, I'm hoping that long term, I think at some point, like, the government have to step in and take control, like whether it's like a governing body or something. But at the moment, unfortunately, it's just the building surveyors are wearing all the brunt. And so again, I think there's things like a trade needs to come in, like there needs to be some sort of registered trade. They've kind of done it with the FPAS. What is it? The Fire Protection Accreditation Scheme.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're a part of that, obviously, but it's pretty, to be honest, it's pretty easy to join and to be a part of, and
the
so
FPAA.
Yeah, like it's not really like I wouldn't say it's a barrier of entry. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to work too hard to kind of get it. The building surveyors checking over all of your documents and everything is currently kind of the best they're doing. But again, the problem is that they're not experts in that area.
Yeah.
And so you've got someone that isn't trained in the area, isn't like when I say they're not trained in the area, they do understand the concepts a lot of the time. But it's the connection again between what the suppliers can actually offer and what the fire engineers or the building surveyors understand as concepts.
Yep.
They're two very, very different things. And when you're working towards a deemed to satisfy system, it has to be exactly as per the test report or very, very close.
So we talk about this term buildability.
Yeah.
Like often, what's been designed is just not able to be achieved on site.
No, that's right. Exactly.
And, people who without training in that area might not realise that.
Yeah, exactly. And also just understanding like how far you can kind of go within that sort of realm as well, and like what sort of areas you can push into, and or even setting it up for a performance solution. You don't just engage someone and then get a performance solution. Like you have to consider, normally what happens with a performance solution is you have kind of the concept of what should happen, and then you basically have supporting test reports that allow you to then kind of back that decision in. And so then a fire engineer might come in and say, yeah, well, based on sort of all of this data, we'll create a performance solution. And so even just getting to that point, you still need to have a really good understanding of actually like what can be achieved normally from different products, and then kind of mush some things together. So
and just how they work together, and even how the treatment of different systems, I suppose, how they interface.
Absolutely.
How the steel connects to the board.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
that everything can get the fire rating that it needs.
Yeah, for sure. It's a frustrating thing too. Like the fact that the suppliers own kind of their own testing, and I suppose as they should, but because they've had to go out there and pay for their own testing and everything, they're obviously going to put their blinkers on and only going to flog their product.
Yeah.
And so we've got some really good systems from each supplier kind of has a niche in their own kind of area. A lot of them do. And then you kind of got guys like ProMat that are kind of they do a lot and they've been around for a long time, but then you got Trafalgar might release some really good products that come out to the market. Boss might release some really good products, but they don't work together. And so you've got some things that are really good with one supplier, okay with others, and it just, they don't really work together nicely. And so unfortunately, because they don't work together, it means that you have to kind of go all or nothing with one supplier.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, which is
and
really
again, that might not be the best solution necessarily for the builder.
No, that's right. Costly too, a lot of the time.
Yeah. So one of the things I thought you might touch on with where the industry is heading is just the idea of this pre-construction register, particularly for fire stopping.
Yep.
Something that we're getting asked to do more of.
Yep.
How is that going to, I suppose, impact or change the industry?
Yeah, so I think, look, to be honest, I'm not sure when it was brought in. I can definitely see why, but I know that a lot of building surveyors are now requesting or requiring pre-construction registers prior to them receiving their building permit.
Yep.
And so it's kind of the first, it's the first attempt at making sure that the project is set up correctly. And so I really like the idea that it's before the job. It's it is in that design sort of pillar of building.
Yeah.
And what it means though is it means that you have to have a decent understanding of the building and what needs to be required. And so what they're basically asking for is registers before they start the build. So what products are you going to use, in what scenarios, what are the test reports, et cetera, et cetera. So the building surveyor gets basically a chance to kind of tick everything off for the project before they start. Yep. And so from there, you should be able to basically get to site and start to, you've already got all the documentation. And so you get to site, you install what was on the documentation, and then it should be as easy as just ticking and flicking and keep walking.
Yeah, that's right.
Unfortunately, the problem that will pop up is that when you don't have a central person doing it, you don't have one person looking after the whole thing. And so something that a lot of builders are doing is they're going out and they're getting individual service trades to do their own pre-construction registers.
Yep.
And sending it through and kind of collating it. The problem is kind of what I spoke about before is that you've got, let's say your Sparky wants to use Snap, and let's say your plumber wants to use ProMat, and the ambient guys wants to use Trafalgar. A lot of the time they're going through the same penetrations or very close to each other, and things just aren't very neat on site. It never happens perfectly. And so when you actually get to site, you're potentially going to have all of these different products next to each other, which means that a lot of the time they're actually not going to be compliant because they're not going to be tested next to each other, and you might be
don't have the clearance space required for that test.
Clearance space, or maybe you have to upgrade it with a bat or a board or something in one product, and then if you do that, you have to use that same product for everything.
Yeah. It's also pretty hard for a service trade to treat something like a cable tray when there's multiple services that have jumped into that cable tray.
Yeah, definitely.
So
absolutely.
Who wears the cost of that?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what normally happens. You normally get to the end of the job and it's a fight for cost.
Yeah.
It's a fight for who's paying for it. So,
So, I mean, we're talking about pre-construction register here. Do you think it'll get to the point where everything else that we specify in terms of passive fire will be included in something like that? Because we're specifically talking about penetrations at the moment.
We are talking about penetrations. For the most part, it is mostly documented prior to starting, so it already is actually fairly good. So we actually are already kind of at that point. You're only dealing with 1, 2, 3 products most of the time for the rest of the build, and so that's why it's always been a lot easier.
Yeah, okay.
But when it comes to penetrations, you've just got The other thing is too is that with structural components, like normally that's been for a long time, that'll always go to a passive fire installer.
Yep.
Like it's something that we do. It's something that's recognised within the industry that what we do, and there's normally cost associated to it. The problem with the penetrations is that a lot of the times people leave it with the subbies. Again, like the builder will say it's included in their contract. So you've got plumbers that are full-time plumbers that are then now required to do essentially a whole nother trade, which is passive fire protection, and they're basically being asked to quote on it. They're being asked to install it, registers everything, and so the level of complexity when you leave it to the individual service trades just goes up drastically, and so that I think that's why there's the biggest problem in that space. Whereas the structure, normally there's costs associated with it, so it makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, we're probably going to wrap up shortly. Is there anything else that you wanted to sort of dive into, or any final thoughts?
Yeah, look, I suppose the biggest thing for me with the way the industry's heading is that even with like the pre-construction register, like I think we charge anywhere from like $1,500 to $3,000 or something like currently. Like it's so insignificant. It's such a small price to pay to get someone that does this thing every day. And the reason we can charge so low for it is because we do it every day. Like it's so easy for us, and we're working with all the suppliers and that kind of thing. So we do things very, very quickly. It's the same thing when it actually gets to site. And I was having this discussion with a builder the other day. When you actually compare the costs of like, for us to do it kind of risk-free, guaranteed it's done correctly, we work with a building surveyor, like, we make sure that it's all passed, everything. Like you're completely offsetting the whole risk, the whole everything onto us. And so when you compare the costs of that to the costs of actually them doing it in-house, like because there isn't a direct cost associated to it, most people don't really understand it. And so they just end up spending hours and labor and time on their project managers doing it or their contract administrators doing it or whatever. And so there hasn't been this awareness of like, you actually are spending the costs. Yeah. And to be honest, you're probably spending the costs on someone that's inexperienced. Yeah. We know that hasn't had a lot of chance to upskill and doesn't have a relationship with all of the suppliers. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to take them a lot longer. And you've still got the risk of it coming back to you in the back and forth, and then having to still come to an expert installer to be able to understand it and talk through these things anyway. And so I think just a probably closing thing for me is that like build the awareness. Like go and actually do some do your sums, do some costing on it, because you'd be incredibly surprised at the amount of like money and time you're actually spending on trying to get this stuff right. And I've had a lot of conversation with building surveyors and engineers, and they're saying this is the biggest risk for them at the moment. Yeah. And so, they're putting a lot of time and effort into making sure these things are right. And building surveyors are going to cost you more than we do.
Yeah, that's right.
So like, give us a call. Like, honestly, it's one of those things, us or anyone else that's kind of at the top end. Yeah. At the forefront. Yeah. And there's some really good players out there. Yeah. That are doing a good job.
Look, that's what we're hoping to do with this podcast is build awareness of the industry. Not only what we do, but what are the problems that we're seeing. It's going to make, not only does it make our lives more easy, it solves a lot of problems for the builder. We avoid hold-ups, builders avoid hold-ups, and projects are going to progress as they should.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, well, thanks, mate. It's good to chat.
It's good to chat.
This is episode 1. We're going to keep this thing going, and like I said at the start, we're Pro Finish Fire Protection. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, guys.